Hello and welcome to Dining with Death, True Crime Tuesday. If you're watching this, I would bet you're a person who enjoys certain elements of the darker side of life. You probably like horror movies and scary stories and rainy days, and you probably value your alone time. Some of us are just wired that way. Stories like the one we are going to discuss today are made for people like us, and Hollywood usually jumps at the chance to make money off them, knowing audiences will eat them up. But at the heart of some of those stories lies real tragedy that happened to real people. I'm guilty of forgetting that from time to time. Sometimes we get swept up in the lore and we forget about the real lives affected. Today's story is a good example of that happening, and so today we are going to focus on remembering the people we lost. This is the true story of the Amityville Murders. Let's get into it. I can't speak for my foreign friends that watch this channel, but I'm confident in saying my American friends almost all recognize this house immediately. This is commonly called the Amityville Horrors House, but before it was known as that, it had a much happier life. 30 miles outside of New York City sits the Long Island town of Amityville. This house stands in the little town at 112 Ocean Avenue. It was purchased by Ronald DeFeo and his wife Louise in 1965. The couple had 5 children: Ronald Jr., who they called Butch, Dawn, Allison, Mark, and John. The family had moved to Amityville from Brooklyn, where Ronald DeFeo worked as a service manager at his wife's family car dealership called Brigante Carl Buick in Brooklyn. When the family purchased the house, Ronald Sr. dubbed it High Hopes and had a sign made for it. The name would take on a very sad and ironic connotation in later years. Ronald DeFeo Sr. was an abusive man. He was both verbally and physically abusive to his wife and children. Besides his wife Louise, his main target was his oldest son, Ronald Jr., who they called Butch, like I said. Butch's friends no longer came to his house to visit him. Even as older teenagers, they were terrified of Ronald DeFeo Sr., as they had seen him fly into rages and beat his kids and his wife right in front of them. He was a monster of a man. Barry Springer, one of Butch's friends, said, "The DeFeo home was a crazy house. The family was always yelling at each other." He said Butch was bullied at school, where he was beaten up and often called fat. That's awful. But his father seemed embarrassed by Butch, and instead of helping him, he bullied him further and told him to be a man and stand up for yourself, fight back. As Butch grew older, his temper became even worse than his father's. Butch and his father, Ronald Sr., would often get into physical fights. People who knew Butch said he had an unpredictable temper. He would blow up for absolutely no reason. His outbursts became so frequent and so severe that his parents sent him to a psychiatrist. They didn't do a great job following up with the doctor, and they claimed that the doctor didn't really help, so they then resorted to giving Butch whatever he wanted. They thought that would somehow make him less volatile. They even bought Butch a speedboat as a teenager. Spoiling Butch didn't work. He and his father continued to get into physical fights, and the level of violence and turmoil inside the home only increased. Butch's behavior got so bad that at only 17 years old, he was kicked out of Amityville High School. After losing probably the only structure and discipline that he had, Butch started doing drugs, hard drugs like LSD and heroin. Once when he was on a hunting trip with some friends, Butch aimed his rifle at a man he had known his entire life. The man was upset and left the area, and when Butch saw him later on, he couldn't understand why the man had taken off. When he was 18 years old, Butch started working for his father. Well, kind of. He got a paycheck whether or not he showed up for work, so it wasn't so much of a job as it was another way to enable him. He was supposed to be working in the family's dealership's mechanic shop, doing oil changes, washing cars, that sort of thing, but he later said that he could do whatever he wanted because his family was his boss. Butch frequented a local bar called the Chatterbox. One of the bartenders there recalled, "Butch was a nice guy until he started to drink. Then he would throw bar stools and pool cues." He also once shoved his girlfriend across the room when she tried to calm him down during an argument with their friends. Butch once told an elderly neighbor that he was going to punch her in the face because he thought her daughter was throwing rocks at the DeFeo house. This was a man who liked to create his own problems. He walked around in a rage, looking for any reason to pick a fight. October of 1974. Ronald Sr. and Butch's relationship is worse than ever. Ronald Sr. gives Butch $20,000 in cash from the dealership and entrusts him with depositing the money into the company account. The deposit was never made, and Butch claimed that he had been robbed and the money was stolen. Well, his father didn't believe him, and I don't blame him. But when an argument ensued, Butch pulled out a gun and threatened to kill his own father. Butch would get arrested from time to time for fighting, and once for stealing an outboard boat motor. He seemed to be declining, and his mood grew worse over time. November 13th, 1974. Butch DeFeo left his home to go to work. He stopped at a lunch counter to get something to eat and to wait for the dealership to open for the day. At lunchtime, he left work and met his girlfriend, Sherry Klein, and a friend of his named Bobby Kelsky. He told both his girlfriend and his friend that he hadn't been able to get in touch with his family all day. He said he had called home a few times, but no one had ever answered the phone. He even went over to the phone in the diner and used that phone to call home in front of his girlfriend so she could hear the phone ring and saw for herself that nobody picked up. At about 6 o'clock that evening, Butch went into Henry's bar, which was not very far from his house. He used the payphone in the bar several times, telling his friends that he hadn't been able to get a hold of his family all day. He said that he was going to go home and break into the house through a window. Now, I'm not sure why he didn't have keys to the house, but he told his friends he was going to have to break in. So he left Henry's bar a little after 6 o'clock and then came running back into the bar around 6:30, screaming that his parents had been shot. Several of Butch's friends left the bar with him and they all went to the DeFeo house. When they got there, they found Ron Sr., Luis, and all of Butch's brothers and sisters dead inside. Butch's friend, Joseph Yassir, called the police. As police entered the house, they found something out of a horror movie that actually became a horror movie. Ronald DeFeo Sr., 43 years old at the time, was dead in his bed. He had been shot twice in the lower back. Next to him was his wife, Louise, also 43 at the time. She was shot twice as well, in the right flank and the chest. She was face down but turned slightly on her right, as if she had begun to get up before she was shot. It was later determined that both Ron and Louise lived for several minutes after being shot, but they bled to death in their bed. Mark DeFeo, age 12, and his brother John, age 9, were both in their beds, dead. They had both been shot in the back at close range. It was later determined that the killer stood between the two twin beds, less than 2 feet away from each victim, and shot them, one right after the other. The bullets pierced their bodies, their mattresses, and the floor underneath. In the next room, Allison DeFeo, age 13, was dead in her bed. She had been shot once in the face from less than 2 feet away. It is believed that she turned around to face the muzzle of the gun. The bullet went through her head, her mattress, and then ricocheted to the floor. Dawn DeFeo, age 16, was dead next to her sister. She had been shot at the back of her neck from about 3 feet away. Her face was shattered and she had died instantly. The scene was so grisly and so horrific that several of the police officers had to remove themselves from the house. This entire family had been wiped out, executed, essentially. But by who? Butch DeFeo was taken to police headquarters. Police weren't sure if he was a suspect or if they needed to protect him because he was the only surviving member of the family and someone wanted them dead. As police continued their investigation at the home, they found the murder weapon, a .35 caliber Marlin rifle that Butch had put in a separate box away from his other guns. Police began to form suspicion about Butch DeFeo pretty quickly on. I wish I had a video of his police interrogation, but for you youngsters, they didn't start using surveillance video footage of any kind during police interrogations until 1988, and that was just in larger precincts. The practice of recording police interrogations didn't become common until around 1991, and even then, most precincts didn't videotape, they only did audio recordings. So sadly, we don't have any footage of our boy Butch being interviewed. As Butch was questioned, he very quickly offered up his alibi. He said he had gone into work early that morning, that he had stopped at the lunch counter. He then went to work and left for lunch. He recounted his entire day with detail. The day when he was sure he had been to several locations where he would be seen and remembered. He then offered up a theory to police. He said he believed that the killings had been carried out by a mob hitman named Louis Fellini. He said that Fellini and his father had a terrible argument, and Fellini was out to get the family. The police began listening, but they quickly noticed something. As they would ask Butch to backtrack in his story in order to confirm some details, Butch couldn't really remember what he had told the police. The cops then informed Butch that the coroner said the family had been killed between 3 and 4 a.m. when Butch was in the home and not at work. So then Butch changed his story to say that Fellini and an accomplice had murdered the family and forced him to watch. His story was full of inconsistencies, and it changed throughout the night and into the next day. Police contacted Louis Fellini and found out that he was in a different state and could prove that he hadn't been anywhere near Amityville that night. As the next day wore on, Butch DeFeo wore down. By midday, he confessed. He had killed his family. He waited until they were all asleep. He loaded his gun and carried extra ammunition, and he went room to room, executing his family members as they slept. Ronald DeFeo Jr., Butch, was arrested for the murder of his family and ordered to stand trial. His defense attempted to provide an insanity defense. Butch's attorney claimed that Ronald Jr. heard voices that told him that his family was out to get him, that they were all plotting against him. Then the attorney made claims stating Butch said he was possessed by the devil. Here we go again. The good old devil always shows up right when somebody needs to blame him for something. What would we do without that guy? Butch's defense attorney showed him a photo of his mother, and he claimed to not know who she was. He kind of tried to pull the Kenneth Bianchi act, pretending to be insane, and it went over about as well as it did for Bianchi. When the defense could see their insanity tactics were not working, then they began claiming self-defense. I'm not sure what to even say about that or where Butch found attorneys that would even try and make that claim. That's a real big stretch. A psychiatrist for the defense testified that Butch DeFeo was insane, but the state had Dr. Harold Zolan counter that claim. He said, although DeFeo was a user of heroin and LSD, he had an antisocial personality disorder and was aware of his actions at the time of his crime. After deliberating, the jury found Ronald DeFeo Jr. guilty of 6 counts of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 6 sentences of 25 years to life. As Ronald DeFeo sat in prison, filing appeals and changing his story, even blaming his own mother for the murders at one point, life on the outside moved on. December 1975. A man named George Lutz and his wife Kathy bought the now infamous Amityville house, formerly called High Hopes, for a bargain, the low price of $80,000. This is a 5-bedroom Dutch colonial-style house with a swimming pool and a boathouse, so $80,000 even back then was a real steal. George and Kathy Lutz had married just a few months before the purchase in July of 1975, and they each sold their former homes and bought this one together with their children to start their new life as a blended family. Kathy had 3 children from a previous marriage, and the couple had a dog named Harry. The Lutz family was aware of the DeFeo murders that happened inside of the home they were about to purchase. They discussed the event and decided it wasn't a problem for them. They moved in on December 18th, 1975, and here's a creepy detail. The DeFeo furniture, it was included in the deal. I don't know why that detail gives me the heebie-jeebies, but for some reason it really does. Buying a murder house is one thing, right? Living on the murdered family's furniture, I don't know, that just bothers me so much more. It's so personal. George and Kathy might not have been bothered by what happened in the house, but a friend of theirs was, and this friend insisted that they have a priest bless the house. George knew a Catholic priest named Father Ray, and this priest agreed to carry out the house blessing. Father Ray arrived to bless the house while George and Kathy were still unpacking. He went into the house and began his blessing. When he flicked the first holy water and began to pray, he claims to have heard a deep, masculine voice say loudly, "Get out." Now, for some reason, the priest does not mention this to the Lutzes at the time. He finishes his blessing and he leaves. But a few days later, on Christmas Eve of 1975, the priest called George Lutz and told him about hearing the voice and told George that the family needed to stay out of the second floor room where he had heard that voice. The room was the bedroom where Mark and John DeFeo were murdered. Kathy had planned on using it for a sewing room. The priest then went on to tell George Lutz that after he left the house on the day of the blessing, he developed a high fever and blisters on his hands similar to stigmata. George and Kathy Lutz were not sure what to make of this. They were not religious people and hadn't felt any reservations about buying the murder house. But according to George Lutz, that all quickly changed. George and Kathy Lutz claimed that everything in the house quickly changed. They said they heard voices, they experienced swarms of insects, they felt afraid at all times, and that basically they were convinced that their house was possessed by an evil entity that didn't want them there. By mid-January 1975, after a second attempt at blessing the house was made, something happened that the Lutzes have always declined to comment on, saying that what they experienced is, quote, too frightening to talk about. But they contacted Father Ray, who told them to gather their belongings and leave. The family packed some bags and went to stay at Kathy's mother's house in nearby Deer Park, New York. However, they said that didn't help. They claimed the entity followed them there. They said they would see the entity as a greenish-black slime going up the staircase towards them. They said they heard voices and that they were afraid for their children. The couple sent movers to clean out the house and never went back. You've seen the movies, you know the story, and if you haven't seen them, they're some of the better horror movies made in that era. They made a lot of sequels, but of course the original is always the best. Although I will say that the remake in 2005 with Ryan Reynolds, it was decent. It wasn't nearly as bad as a lot of remakes are, especially in the horror genre. They're very entertaining films, and the films are based on the book The Amityville Horror by author Jay Anson, which was written in 1977. The book became the subject of a lot of criticism because it played pretty fast and loose with the truth. The book claims the Lutzes had to call the police to the home on several occasions because they thought someone was in the house. The Amityville police have no record of ever being called to the house. There's also a story about how the Lutzes and the author got drunk together one night and kind of created the story of the haunting. A lot of people say that while the priest may have actually felt something in the house, may have actually believed it was haunted, the Lutz family didn't, and they really embellished what actually happened there. The criticism got very strong, and the Lutzes kind of disappeared from the spotlight. Lawsuits were filed and the Lutzes refused to speak about what happened there. Kind of turned into a really big thing in the media. There's a lot of info out there if you're interested in learning more about what happened to the house and to its subsequent owners. Now today, well, the house still stands. They changed the address from 112 Ocean Avenue to 108 Ocean Avenue to deter tourists. What? Did anyone actually think that was going to work? It's a very nice looking home. It always has been, and this is what it looks like today. They replaced those two iconic windows that kind of look like eyes, and they tried to make the home look a little bit different, but it's the same old house. As you can see, it's very nice inside and has beautiful views. The house is occupied, and no reports of paranormal activity have been made. March 12th, 2021. So what happened to Butch DeFeo? He just died a few months ago. We know he died in the Albany Medical Center, but his cause of death has never been released. He was only 69 years old, but a lot of those years are prison years, and those are tough years. So he's gone. He spent his years in prison telling different versions of what happened, claiming he was in a drug-induced fog. Then he claimed he didn't remember what happened. Oh wait, yes, he does remember. It was definitely his mother. Just, kind of the run-of-the-mill BS that these guys come up with sometimes when they're in jail. But the bottom line is, he's dead. He did give some interviews, most memorably one in 2010 and one on June 2nd, 2014, while incarcerated at Green Haven Correctional Facility in New York. At the time of the interview, he had been incarcerated for 39 and a half years and had been denied parole 8 times. He was 62 years old at the time of the interview. It's almost 2 hours long and goes in depth on a lot of Butch's accusations, that the mafia was involved in the murders. He claims that the Lutz family and he were friends before the murders, and he used to take them to buy drugs in the city. He kind of tries to say that the Lutzes bought the house because they knew him and they wanted publicity. He's a strange guy, and he makes a lot of very wild statements in this interview. But ultimately, he ends up blaming his sister, Dawn, for instigating the murders. He claims that he and Dawn started drinking that night and talking about how much they both hated their parents, and that Dawn ended up taking the gun, that he had another one, and they both participated in the murders.
The evening of the murders. So we've already established kind of what was going on at that point. That you wanted out, your sister wanted out, everybody wanted out of that house.
There was a fight in the house that night, so
Okay.
I told my sister, look, go in the garage and get my car. I said, in fact, I'll walk down there with you, take my car and get out of here before something else happens. I said, we got to talk about this. She took my car. I don't know where she went. She probably went to Grace Fagan's house. That's another one.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, she was gone for a while, maybe 2 hours. Then when she came back, you're going to smoke reefer and then you're going to smoke that dust. I was getting it for her, so I was getting the dust from Barry Sprinklers, the one with the made out of ether, not formaldehyde. You could smell that stuff on somebody. She come back in here acting crazy. I said, look, this ain't working. We got to do something. We're going to do it now, or just let it go forever. Well, what are we going to do? I said, our problem is one person. It's nobody else. I said, they're going to kill me. I said, and you're chasing him around the table with a knife. I said, as far as I'm concerned, he's letting you do it. Then she got tight with me. We were down the basement talking. She said, well, we got to do something. I said, I know we got to do something. I just told you you're going to kill me. I got to stop this. I said, if they get me, at least I'm going to try to do something. Truthfully, this is the truth. She went up to my bedroom. I don't know what made her grab that. She grabbed a 35 caliber Marlin and loaded it up.
Where did you keep the Marlin? Did you keep the Marlin in the gun rack?
No, it was on the floor.
Okay.
Against the wall. There was so many guns, it was ridiculous.
Okay.
This is what I'm saying. He told me to get rid of the guns. He told me weeks before. The only gun I got rid of was my uncle's.
Okay.
And she loaded it up. It was a lever action. She,
7 rounds.
Yeah, she liked that gun for some reason. I don't know why. She loaded it up. I said, what are you going to do with that? I was laughing. I thought it was funny. He says, I'm going in there and I'm going to get him when he's sleeping. I said, you're just going to walk in there and do it. I said, well, you got more heart than I got because I ain't never killed nobody. And I said, that's a hell of a place to start. But anyway, then I started drinking. Next thing I know, we're talking. I said, enough of this bullshit. When I start drinking, my personality changes.
So it's starting to get kind of late into the early morning hours at this point?
Now, I'm going to tell you exactly what happened.
Okay.
Her and me, we gassed up. I mean, it's not funny, but now I do think about it, the way it happened. We went from the basement to the porch. I couldn't find a gun. I said, because she took it and threw it under the couch. I don't know what that was all about. She got it out. I hit the lever, and a live round jumped out. I had to put it back in. She said, what are you doing? I said, I'm checking to see if the gun is loaded. She says, oh, well, who would unload it? I said, never mind. I says, come on. I said, you wanted to do this? I says, we're both going to get involved. Now, I didn't know she had a gun on her. She had that 38. I did not know that.
Okay.
We go up the stairs. It was 5 minutes to 1, and I'm going to tell you how I know. Not that I wore a watch. There was a big, the clock with the chimes hanging on the wall.
The cuckoo clock.
No, not the cuckoo clock. That was in the bedroom.
Okay.
When you rang the doorbell, there were chimes right there.
Okay, I know that clock.
In a hallway,
Okay.
but there was a clock
Mm-hmm.
that was added onto the chimes.
Okay.
You know, it was one big piece.
Right.
So at midnight, the thing would chime. So I looked, I said, oh, you know, I couldn't help but look. It said 5 minutes to 1.
Okay.
We went up the stairs, and the only thing lit up there was a candle under the Sacred Heart, his statue, whoever it was. I think it was the Sacred Heart. He had a candle lit. The whole back wall was mirrored from the floor to the ceiling. I was looking in the mirror at him. And she's holding a conversation with me like they're not there in the bedroom. So now I'm saying to myself, wow, I must be loaded and she must be high. That's what the problem is. Really, I didn't even know if that was reality. But anyway, we both walk in the room and nobody wakes up. I said, okay. I said, you fat motherfucker, blah, 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 blah. I start calling them all sorts of names. I said, you want to kill me? Kill me now, you fat bastard. He started to make a move to get out of that bed. Boy, I'm going to tell you now, I don't care. The fear of God came right into me, boy. I said, oh, I ain't letting him get his hands on this gun. I shot him in the back. I shot him one time. In the course of shooting him in the back, my sister yells, look out, she's got a gun. I shot him again. He was getting up trying to get me, and I hear boom. And I just fired a shot at him, but I hear boom. I said, what is this, an echo chamber? I'm saying to myself, I said, oh my God, I'm shot. And then I hear another boom. I said, what the hell is wrong with me? My sister shot my mother, but I swung around with the gun and shot my mother because I didn't know what the hell, who was doing who.
I don't think I'm reaching too far to say that Ronald DeFeo Jr. is a man not to be trusted. He has so many versions of what happened that night. He changed his story so many times that it's tough to take anything he says seriously. A friend of Butch's made a documentary called My Amityville Horror in 2013. I've seen it a few times. It's kind of a different take on this story, told by someone who was close to the murders but not involved in the murders. It's online and you can watch it if you're interested. It's got some pretty interesting information in it. There's no question the Amityville murders are burned into the American psyche, not just because of the horrific nature of the crime, but because of the pop culture sensation that took place after the crime, which created kind of a snapshot of a really important time in our culture. It was the onset of our interest in true crime cases and was also the era of the horror movie. The real events were so terrible and so unbelievable that they ended up serving as the perfect plot for not just one, but many scary films. But as we are all painfully aware, Real life is always stranger and much more terrifying than the movies. Thank you for joining me today on Dining with Death, True Crime Tuesday. I sure appreciate you spending a few minutes of your day with me. Like the video and subscribe to the channel if you would like to see more content like this. It really helps me out. Stay safe and be kind to each other, and I'll see you next time on Dining with Death. Bye.